Everyone was asleep in Merwilmba. It was near the end of the night, the date, November 23rd, 1978, but someone was awake, and before dawn the largest cash robbery in Australian history had already been completed. A bank had been robbed, and the most unbelievable part was that this bank stood just 100 meters from the local police station, and $1.7 million had vanished. Yet not a single alarm sounded, not a single gunshot was heard, and no one noticed a thing. This was a 130-year-old Bank of New South Wales building. A gang entered through the rear door and, in what resembled a surgical operation, without blowing the vault or causing noise or chaos, stole every single banknote inside and disappeared into the darkness of the night. This was not an ordinary bank robbery. This was a crime shaped in the shadow of a man known in the underworld as the Monster, whispered to have involved inside information and years later even claimed from a prison cell. The money stolen in 1978 would be worth roughly $10 million today. What makes this case truly valuable is not the money taken, but the fact that 45 years later, not a single person has ever been caught. It was as if the money had never existed, not a single dollar ever recovered. So how can a gang spend hours robbing a bank beside a police station and vanish without leaving a single witness behind? The answer is not hidden in Merwilmba, but in Melbourne's 1970s criminal underworld. His nickname was the Monster. His real name was Graham Kinberg. He was 52 years old, a master safecracker with decades of experience and perhaps one of the most influential gangsters of his time. Yet at first glance he looked no different from an ordinary worker. When police asked what he did for a living, his answer was always the same: crane operator, a regular working man. But this ordinary man lived an unimaginable life of luxury, sending his children to private schools, while the source of his income remained unexplained. At a young age, he learned the trade from Melbourne's underground craftsmen and built his reputation on a single skill: opening safes. In his 30s, he could open nearly any vault. In his 40s, he was teaching others. Kinberg understood one key principle: the best robberies were executed without violence, with flawless planning. On the job, he never talked, never rushed, never took unnecessary risks. Throughout the 1970s, a series of robberies in Melbourne and Sydney were believed to be the work of a single crew. Police named them the Magnetic Drill Gang. Within minutes, they drilled a small, precise hole above the lock tumblers, inserted a medical scope to see inside, and manipulated the tumblers one by one from the outside, without explosives, without noise or panic, relying purely on mechanical mastery, using only two specialized tools: a diamond-tipped drill and an electromagnetic clamp fixed to the vault. For years, they practiced on Chubb safes, the most common brand in Australian banks, repeatedly drilling safes taken from previous robberies and memorizing every weak point. By 1978, despite pulling off hundreds of thousands of dollars in heists, their eyes were set on a bigger target. Police believed the Monster was behind the great Merwilmba robbery. He had been linked to a Queensland gold bullion heist and to stolen goods found in the homes of wealthy businessmen, and each time he somehow escaped. But was it really him? Or was someone deeper involved, inside the bank or inside the police? That night in Merwilmba, more than a vault was opened. One of the greatest mysteries in Australian criminal history was born, and to this day no one knows where the $1.7 million went. He was always negotiating, always finding a way out. His theory was simple: keep the money, just don't charge him with burglary. But even the Monster needed a bigger score. They wanted a job that would set them up for life. They found it in an unlikely place, a quiet, rural town called Merwilmba. Located near the Queensland-New South Wales border, Willa had a population of around 8,000 in 1978, a calm community where little ever happened. But the Bank of New South Wales branch in Merwilmba had a secret. It was a collection center. Old banknotes from dozens of smaller branches across northeastern New South Wales were sent there. The Merwilmba branch gathered the money and then shipped it to the Reserve Bank. That meant on certain days the vault held far more banknotes than any rural bank normally would. Millions of dollars sitting inside an ordinary 130-year-old building in a town where people did not even lock their doors. The bank stood in the center of town, a heritage building only 100 meters from the police station, close enough to see the front entrance. But the thieves were not interested in the front. They were interested in the back. Behind the bank stood an old, weathered wooden door leading directly into the strong room. From there they could access the main banking hall, and from the hall, the vault itself. The vault was protected by a Chubb-safe door, the same model the gang had practiced on for years. One more detail made Mervillemba perfect: timing. On November 22, 1978, a major cash shipment arrived. Old $50 notes collected from nearby branches, untraceable bundles stacked in large plastic containers, totaling exactly $1.7 million. Someone knew that shipment was coming. Someone knew exactly when it would arrive, and someone told the gang. Who was the inside man? How did they know about the money? Even 45 years later, the question that still haunts investigators is simple. The gang prepared for months, and according to one account, they had been following an armored truck along the coast, studying its timing and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They considered taking the money on the road, but that plan had problems. Armed robbery meant guns. Guns meant someone could die, and death meant murder charges. It was rejected. Finishing the job inside the bank was cleaner. Break and enter carried lighter sentences if caught and less risk of violence, so they chose the bank. The gang established a base on the Gold Coast just across the Queensland border. The area was filled with tourists year-round. 5 strangers could blend into the crowd. No one could notice them. No one would remember their faces. For weeks they studied the town's rhythm and watched the bank. They noted police shift changes, when the streets went quiet, when the last lights turned off. On the night of the robbery, around 9:30 p.m., men were seen outside the bank. A white Holden HQ panel van was spotted nearby. Everything was calculated. Equipment, entry points, exit routes, timing, all carefully planned. They knew opening the vault would take long hours, so they prepared for a long night. 5 men, each assigned a precise role, working in silence while the town slept. Now here is the unsettling question. 5 men, 1 small town, 1 bank, 100 meters from a police station. Would you take that risk for $1.7 million? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. The time had come. Shortly after midnight on November 23, 1978, they moved toward the back of the bank, approaching the old wooden door, the weak link in the bank's defenses that led into the strong room. Without triggering a single alarm, they forced the door open quietly. No lights turned on. 5 men slipped inside. The strong room opened into the main banking hall. From there, they could see the vault door. Their target, the same model Chubb safe they had cracked dozens of times before. They set up their equipment. First, the electromagnetic clamp was fixed onto the vault door, then the diamond-tipped drill. The motor hummed softly as it began biting into the steel. The drill pierced a small, perfectly placed hole directly above the lock tumblers. A man inserted a medical endoscope. Through that tiny hole he could see the internal mechanism of the lock, the tumblers that stood between them and $1.7 million. With specialized tools he began to move the tumblers slowly, feeling for the correct positions, listening for the faint clicks. They knew they couldn't rush it, because this was delicate work. A single wrong move could jam the entire mechanism. They might have to start over, or worse, abandon the job completely. The safecracker worked by touch, performing his craft like an artist, guided by years of experience. Outside, the town's silence held firm. Not a single car on the streets, not a single light in the windows, only darkness and the distant sound of insects. Inside the bank, the only sounds were the clicks of the tumblers and the steady rhythm of their breathing. While most of the gang focused on the safe and the space around it, one man had a different assignment. He was cutting an escape route through the bank's second floor, a backup exit in case everything went wrong. Hours passed. The streets outside stayed silent. At the police station just 100 meters away, there was no movement, no patrols, no flashlight beams, nothing, as if every officer was asleep. Inside the bank, the safecracker kept working, tumbler by tumbler, click by click. And then it happened. With the final click, the vault door opened. $1.7 million in $50 notes stacked in plastic containers. So much money that most people would never see it even across 10 lifetimes. They moved fast. They emptied the vault. Every banknote, every container, loaded into bags. But it still wasn't over. They had one last task. They jammed the vault door shut from the inside, removed the combination dials, and took the safe handle completely off the door. Why? To buy time. The plan was simple. When the bank opened in the morning, staff wouldn't be able to get into the vault. They would have to call a locksmith, and they knew that locksmith would have to come from Brisbane, hours away. By the time anyone understood what had happened, the gang would already be gone. They slipped out the back, left the door slightly ajar, loaded their equipment and the money into the white panel van, and vanished into the Australian night. Where did they go? How do 5 men carrying $1.7 million in cash simply evaporate? The most likely answer is the Gold Coast, their base of operations. A tourist haven where strangers wouldn't draw attention. They probably split up immediately. Each man took his share. Each man went a different direction. The classic strategy: if one gets caught, the others stay free. Did they celebrate? Did they count the money in an anonymous motel room? Did they realize they had just pulled off the biggest heist in Australian history? We'll never know, because none of them ever talked. The sun rose over Merwila on the morning of November 23, 1978. While the townspeople sipped their coffee and read their newspapers, no one knew that the biggest bank robbery in Australian history had taken place while they slept. At 7:30 a.m., a security guard arrived at the Bank of New South Wales. He walked toward the back of the building. When he saw the rear door slightly ajar, his heart began to race. He stepped inside. In the strong room, he noticed something was wrong. Things had been moved. He crossed into the main hall and headed for the vault. The vault door was closed, but the handle was missing. The combination dials had been removed. He tried to open it. Nothing. The door wouldn't budge. It had been locked from the inside. He hit the alarm button. There was no way to crack it from the outside. Finally, police made a decision. If they couldn't go through the door, they would go through the wall. Council workers were called in, and with heavy equipment they broke through the vault wall. When they finally got inside, a bank official surveyed the damage and spoke 4 words that would be etched into Australian criminal history. They got the lot. $1.7 million. Not a single banknote left behind. The investigation began immediately. Detectives examined the scene inch by inch. They found the drilled hole in the vault door, the marks from the electromagnetic clamp, the medical endoscope left behind. It was the signature of the magnetic drill gang. Forensic experts searched for fingerprints. Nothing useful. The crew had worked carefully, each of them wearing gloves. They examined the wooden rear door and determined it had been forced open, but carefully. Photographs were taken of the vault wall the council workers had smashed through. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Police had to do more damage to the bank than the criminals did. Police knew exactly who they were looking for: Graham Kibur, known as the Monster, and his crew. But knowing and proving were 2 different things. Thanks to the gang's clean workmanship, they left almost no physical evidence. No fingerprints, no one to identify them, nothing. They traced the white Holden panel van, but it led nowhere. The gang had switched vehicles before reaching their final destination, exactly as planned. A $250,000 reward, one of the largest in Australian history, was posted. Anyone whose information led to an arrest would be set for life. No one came forward. Days passed, then weeks, then months. There was no trace of the money. Not a single $50 note from the heist was ever identified. The gang had either laundered it perfectly or hidden it somewhere unreachable. As the physical investigation stalled, another theory began to take shape, one pointing somewhere unexpected. The locals of Merwillumbah had questions. Why wasn't the break-in discovered until 7:30 a.m.? The robbery took hours. The gang was likely inside from midnight until at least 4 or 5 a.m. Yet no one noticed anything until the security guard arrived. How did the criminals know about the money? The $1.7 million shipment had arrived that very day. It was obvious that information about cash transfers between banks wasn't public. Only bank staff or people inside the system would know the schedule. So how deep did the conspiracy go? Was it just one bank employee, or something bigger? Why target a rural branch at all? Murwillumbah was a quiet town, population 8,000. If you wanted to rob a bank, why not hit Melbourne or Sydney? Unless someone told them this particular branch was worth hitting. At the time, former Tweed Mayor Max Boyd was a council member. He said many in the community believed it was an inside job. The crooks knew that the Murwillumbah branch held cash reserves from other banks in the area. Someone must have told them this. Why else would they target a country branch? He explained, but there was another theory. One that pointed not at the bank, but at the police. In April 2017, the treasurer of the Murwillumbah Historical Society, Max Willoughby, revealed something that had never been publicly reported. A senior Sydney police officer had been transferred to Murwillumbah 5 months before the robbery, unusually without explanation. That officer retired from the force in August 1979, less than a year after the heist. His name later appeared in a royal commission. The investigation reviewed intercepted telephone conversations. The commission found that the officer had been deliberately untruthful about his links to a prominent Sydney crime figure, George Freeman. George Freeman was known as one of Sydney's most notorious criminals. He ran illegal casinos protected by corrupt police. He had a wide network reaching as far as Victoria, where Graham Kinn operated. Freeman was rumored to pay off police, to have officers on his payroll in every major city, and to know exactly when raids would happen before they happened. If anyone could arrange for a police officer to look the other way during a bank heist, it was George Freeman. Was there a connection? Did a corrupt officer help facilitate the robbery? Did he make sure no patrols came near the bank that night? Did he ensure the alarm system wasn't checked? But the questions were never answered. For years, police believed that the mastermind behind the Murwillumbah heist was Graham Kinberg. They put him under surveillance, followed him, waited for him to make a mistake, but he never did. The monster continued operating within Melbourne's underworld, staying unnoticed, remaining in the shadows. But in the early 2000s, everything changed. Melbourne became the stage for a bloody underworld war, later known as the Gangland Killings. Many people lost their lives. In the shadow of those mafia reckonings, one name began to be whispered again: Graham Kinberg. He was known to have links to the Moran family. Mark and Jason Moran were killed, and eventually it was the monster's turn. On December 13, 2003, Kinberg left his home for one of his usual routines, going shopping, but he never returned. He was shot and killed just meters away from his car. The master safecracker, who was believed to have planned the largest cash robbery in Australian history, became another victim of an underworld execution on a suburban street. And every secret he knew about Murwillumbah was buried with him. Was he truly the mastermind? Or had the real story closed without ever being told? Years later, in 2022, a new name emerged: Robert Birdie Kidd, a career criminal who had spent 27 years in prison. Police records described him as dangerous and prone to violence. When he published his memoirs, he claimed responsibility for some of Australia's most sensational crimes: horse racing scandals, cartel money transfers hidden in airplane luggage, and most importantly, he declared himself the man behind the Murwillumbah heist. According to Kidd, the target had never been the bank. It had been the armored vehicle. They had followed it for months, memorized its route, but changed their minds at the last minute. Hitting an armored truck required guns. Guns meant the risk of murder, and murder meant life imprisonment. If they entered the bank instead, at worst, they would face break and enter charges. A cold calculation of risk. But there was one fundamental flaw in Birdie Kidd's story. On the night of November 23, 1978, He was in prison. He was incarcerated in Maitland for another job. Although he claimed he watched the news on television and directed the plan from his cell, all the details he described had already been publicly known for years. Was it really him? Or just a prisoner trying to attach his name to a legend? Even after 45 years, police remain skeptical. The Bank of New South Wales building in Murwillumbah still stands today under heritage protection. The police station is still 100 meters away, just as it was that night. The $250,000 reward was never claimed. No one was arrested. No one was convicted. The $1.7 million, worth roughly $10 million today after inflation, remains missing. Not a single banknote has ever been recovered. Kinberg is dead. Kidd's claims were never proven. If there was an inside man, he was never exposed. If there was a corrupt officer, his name never surfaced. The Murwillumbah heist remains the largest unsolved bank robbery in Australian history. Think about it. 45 years, advancing forensic technology, rewards, informants, cold case reviews, and still nothing. The drilled vault door likely still sits in an evidence storage facility. The medical camera used to peer inside the safe has been examined countless times. The files remain archived in boxes, yet there are no answers. Some crimes are solved in days, some take years, and some are never solved. This is one of them. A perfect plan, a perfect execution, a perfect escape. 5 men in a small town opened a vault once considered unbreakable, took $1.7 million, believed to be secure, and disappeared without a trace in a country of 15 million people. Where did the money go? Who spent it? Is it still buried somewhere? Or did it dissolve into the system long ago? The largest robbery in Australian history, and the criminals are still free. And perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is this: sometimes the biggest crimes are the quietest ones. If this story made you think, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel for similar cases. Because some secrets never close, they are only left to time.